Who would be a Wolves fan, eh?
On goes Bull. People might yet win it here for Wolves. Flash in the shot. What a goal! Molineux in all its magnificence.
Right, deep breath. Firstly, are you okay? I hope so. Feels very strange indeed sitting here without Phil.
Neves. Oh, gem! Old gold gem!
Well, that old gold gem now belongs to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Welcome to the first post-Neves Wolves Fancast, everybody, part of the 90-Minute Football Network. Adam here as your host, along with Matt and Andy, to talk about our former captain's surprising move, among other recent news. Guys, how are you doing this evening?
Okay, it's a sad day in Fancast Towers, isn't it? Over the last few days, an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah, still reading a little bit. Like, you knew it was going to happen. It was just a matter of when, but it doesn't soften the blow any, does it? Really?
No, I know. Well, I mean, the dust maybe is starting to settle of the big announcement on Friday night. So after 6 years, 253 appearances for Wolves, scoring 30 goals, most of them strikers. Neves has left Wolves, but not exactly gone to a team that, any of us really expected. So we'll talk through the details of the deal in a moment. But first, I just wanted to gauge how many tissues you got through on that video message from Neves himself that Wolves Twitter account posted on Friday night. Matt, hopefully not as many tissues you normally get through when watching videos of a Friday night.
Oh, absolutely not, mate. That's what the old rag's there for. No, it was. You know what? I never watched it until it's so like emotional. I think I'd feel about this? I made sure I could watch it like with a bit of peace and quiet, so I could just enjoy it and not have like people around me. And that kind of stuff. And when I watched it, it was just, it really did. It did hurt a little. Like, I think once you get the emotional side out of it and you start to think like logically and what it does for the club, etc. But at the time, yeah, it was just an outpouring of everybody, like across Twitter and across Facebook, and you speak to people at work, people that you never talk to about football. They go, "Oh, what about Neves, eh?" And it's like just huge news, and one that's kind of shocked to the core, really.
Andy, what about
Yeah.
Did you get through it?
Completely agree. It was, you know what it was? It was the first minute, like seconds into it, when he sits down, he goes to talk, and his voice just cracks, and you think, "Oh God, this is going to be a rough 3 minutes watching this." And it really was. Just watching this man slowly get more and more upset. And like Matt said, like, my logical brain is excellent. We've got the money we needed. We can look on. But the emotional part of me was just kind of bereft. Like, he's been the talisman for 6 years, as she said. We've seen him almost every minute of every game for the last 250 odd games. So, yeah, it was painful on the emotional side of things.
I think as Matt Bradley just put there in the comments, it wasn't ready for it. We knew it was going to come at some point, this transfer. Well, obviously not to the team, but he was going to go at some point. But it was just dropped in, wasn't it? It was like early Friday evening. Here's your message from Ruben Neves, and your heart sinks, and you realise, oh no. And when he sits down and he's pretty much already crying, or like his eyes have already, like, they're already red, aren't they? They're already like bloodshot red.
Yeah, they are.
As soon as he's even started speaking.
But
he lists off all of his, like, what he's done and all about his family. When he started talking about his family and stuff, about how he welcomed his family, and that sort of got me in the feels a little bit. I don't know about you guys.
That's it. Like, for me, it's his kids have grew up here and born like here and grew up here, and that just felt really I put a tweet out that was a bit on the mawkish side, but saying about how he embraces the culture and the city. And I, living here all my life, I won't have a bad word said about what isn't always a fantastic city. But I really felt like him as a player. Really did embrace, living here and having these kids involved here, and they grew up here, and it was just that players come and go, and phases of the club's evolution will be. But that hurt, especially the family bit, because it's a lot of like corporate buzzwords when companies talk about having a family dynamic, but it did feel that way with that Portuguese contingent that's slowly ebbing away.
It's something we haven't had at the club for quite some time, really, because I do feel like we went through a bit of a transitional period where it was very much not selfish, but it felt like the players were here for the money rather than for the club. But that was something that Fosun's second season really did instill, was this core Portuguese group. Obviously, you can chuck in like some Moutinho and stuff a little bit further down the line as well. So, yeah, it did feel like it's the splitting up of a family. Like, people are leaving the WhatsApp group and stuff, and it must be kind of heartbreaking for everyone involved in the club too.
I wonder, actually, that's a good point, actually. I wonder who removes him from because normally the captain would really remove him from the WhatsApp group, but he's just got to gracefully bow out himself. And I assume just then Max Kilman take over the ownership of the WhatsApp group from now. But I do wonder, actually, just as a thought popped in my head, when was that filmed, do you reckon? Because I don't know when it was. It obviously wasn't filmed directly the day before, the announcement, because he wouldn't fly back from where he was in Portugal to just do that video and go back. I just wonder when it was filmed. Obviously, the acceptance was he was going to go.
Did you not see?
We might as well do it now because I'm definitely going in the summer. Did
you not see Gully give away the penalty in the background for the second charity game? That's not what was going on at the same time, wasn't it?
That's why it's distracted.
Yeah, that's it.
So, let's get into the details of the deal then. So, he's signing for Al Hilal, who are the most decorated club in Asia, winning over 60 trophies. They've, by all accounts, been recently knocked off their perch as domestic and Asian champions. And so, here's the deal: we get 47 million transfer fee, which I believe is actually a record for Wolves. Better than the Jota deal that we had, and also actually it's the most a Saudi team or something's ever paid for since Pereira from Albion went there. So that's one in the eye for Albion. We've got he signed a 3-year deal, estimated salary of £300,000 a week, tax free, might I add. So that's about £15.6 million a year. So, with the figures in mind, there's obviously a few things that I kind of want us to discuss here. Firstly, what the deal means for the club, and if anything, given the club's expected public comments, that it doesn't change anything FFP wise. But Andy, what do you think this deal does for the club? Because it's the spicy meatball. It's a lot of money, and I'm assuming that this money is going to be paid up front because the Saudis won't dick about with any instalment plan.
You'd certainly hope so. And that is really going to put a big dent in the argument of this FFP nonsense they've been talking about. Like, you can't keep banging that drum when you've just raked in nearly £50 million. Like, it just doesn't really make sense in those terms, especially when they've been touting saying, we're looking at the 8 to 15 million bracket. That's something that, most people I've seen online have sort of embraced that, and no one's arguing that we should be spending 30, 40 million pounds on a player. We're all quite happy with the shop window that we're shopping in. So realistically, I hope we get to see some movement now. I mean, I remember when Lopetegui was saying, obviously, he wanted all of the players in for start of pre-season. As far as I'm aware, pre-season starts in 5 days at time of recording. So I'm hoping that we might see something happen this week. Fingers crossed. I mean, I know we said that probably 12 months ago when Lage wanted exactly the same, and we were waiting up until midnight on the 31st of August. But fingers crossed we might get some good news soon.
Matt, what do you reckon? What do you reckon this do? Does this resolve us now of any potential FFP issues, or does that now mean are we sticking to the 8 to 15 million pound mark?
I think we stick to that regardless of the outgoings. We need Sir Alan Sugar Stewart Kenneth Hall here. Really, he's our money guy to talk us through the financials. But I don't think that changes our approach. To be perfectly honest, I think in the strangest way, I just think it's sheer dumb luck that the Saudis have had him. In that I don't think we've done anything clever about this. I just think that we would have held out for as long as Barca needed us to, and we'd have accepted a shit sum of money because it just our transfer policy with stuff like that. When you think about Traore and Cody to some degree in terms of length of contract and it being a loan, etc. I feel like there's still some naivety there when it comes to our transfer dealings for outgoing players, not necessarily incoming. So I think it will just still be business as usual. I don't think this deal changes a lot. I just think it means that the book looks a little better for us. I don't think it changes our strategy at all.
That's one way to dampen down all the hype.
Sorry.
Thinking that we can go and spend 200 million now because we've got this 47 million in on the books. Well, I guess it might make some sense. I don't know how much Barca were looking to bid, but I'm assuming the Saudis would have absolutely trumped them anyway, money wise. But so if it means what it means for what the deal means for the club, obviously is very good, helps us out, quite timely as well. But I suppose one of the obvious questions is, what does this mean for Neves personally? We'll get to professionally in a minute, but I mean for personally, is this something that he just couldn't resist personally?
You'd think so. I mean, 300 grand a week, even the best will in the world, there's no way he would have been on a third of that at Barcelona. They wouldn't have offered that money. So, to get 300, like you said, was it 15 million? He said it works out to across a year.
Apparently,
so
yes.
So what? 45 million across the contract. It's an incredible amount of money, and you can't blame him for not turning it up, not saying no to it. Especially when I think if the option was there, I do think he probably would have gone to Barcelona. But I think part of Neves' deal with leaving the club was wanting to leave the club in a stronger position. And he knows that the Barcelona deal probably would have been a busted flush for Wolves if it came about at all, because let's be honest, they've become a banter club over the last couple of years. They're almost as bad as Leeds United is how it's gone for Barcelona. It's kind of embarrassing that they're one of the biggest clubs in the world and they can't scrape it to get 2 pennies together. That's ridiculous.
What do you reckon, Matt? What do you reckon personally? Was this something that he was literally for the sake of his family, just like those figures are quoted earlier? Could that just impossible to turn down?
I think it is. This is the difference between. It is a short career in terms of the working life of a person. And don't get me wrong, if he stayed at Wolves on that sum of money for the rest of his playing career, he's not going to be, scraping together cans of cold beans, do you know what I mean, to eat out of. I understand that. But the possibility of being able to secure your children's lives, why, for the sake of your family, why wouldn't you turn it down? Do you know what I mean? Couple of years over there, tax-free, come back when a club are in a stronger position. When this all goes belly up, by the way, I might add, cash the chips in now while you can. When this Saudi things goes the way of other, like China, for example, then it's just, it'd be impossible not to. And I think a lot of people that are holding the moral high ground about it just need to have a think and just think what it does to his family's future for generations to come. Ethically, it's fucking awful. The Saudi whitewashing, sports washing, everything like that. But at the end of the day, we all do. We all consume. I don't want to put this down as some kind of left-wing tirade here on this podcast. It's not what we're about. But we consume things from evil corporations all day, every day. I'm not sure that this is much, he's going to be playing in the back of Neves' mind, to be honest. So, yeah, I think from his family's point of view, he's kind of had to do it. You get offered that kind of money. I don't think many of us would turn it down.
So ultimately, money talks, and professionally, what we'll move on to next. So I want to talk about what this means for him at a professional level, and I guess more so than he's never sacrificing his career ambition for just the gold, because he's been very public, hasn't he? The last 2 years, he's openly said in interviews he doesn't, and he said himself, he doesn't hide it. He wants to play Champions League football. And he might still do, but it's the Asian version, not the European version. But let's face it, this is not what he probably wanted career-wise. It's not what we expected him to go career-wise. So I'm thinking he's 26 now, right? He is in his prime, and there is this obviously this opinion of that, you know, he can still come back to Europe in 3 years' time and play in his prime. Well, he's kind of in his prime now, isn't he? He's 26. If he spends a full 3 years out there, that's 29. You can begin to question what major club would want him at 29 after he's just spent 3 years in Saudi. No, evidently no big club really pushes to get him now. So my question then to you, Andy, is what does this mean for him professionally? What has he taken a huge step down in the terms of the pecking order of world football leagues to get the money? Or has he gone back on his desire to play the Champions League football?
It does feel like he sort of has. Like the Saudi league, there's just no standing there, is there? Let's be brutally honest. It is down there with the likes of the Scottish leagues. There's no real prestige in playing in Saudi Arabia anymore. Whether or not he has had some assurances, because as far as I'm aware, the murdering prince owns all of the clubs. So I think the money goes to everyone. So unless he's told him, we're going to look to bring in all these players and we're going to improve the standard, and he wants to be there day one and grow the league. But realistically, when his career ends and you look at some of the players who are probably not going to be anywhere near as good as Neves, but they're going to come away with X number of European trophies and everything, it does feel like it's a bit of a letdown in a career that's, as you say, it's a very short career. And at 29, is he going to be improving as a player between now and then? I mean, you could argue maybe he does. He's never had the most pace, so he could end up a bit like his idol Pirlo and just sitting deep and pinging balls around and still going till a late time. But the chances of that are slim. You know, that there are more Michael Johnsons than there are Andrea Pirlos in this game. So I just don't know why he would have chose it other than for the money. And that's not a criticism of him, because if you offered me a massive pay rise like that, I would soon leave my job as well. So I get it, but at the same time, think of the prestige of it. I don't know.
So what do you reckon, Matt? I mean, if from a professional standpoint, do you reckon he'll? Well, one, can you see why he's done it? And two, do you reckon, as Andy said, that in 10 years' time or more when he's retired, do you reckon he'll look back and think, I've had those 3 years in Saudi. You might not even win anything. Yeah, I'm filthy rich, but was it the right thing to do, or is he just at the whim of he had to leave Wolves? There's no other viable option than to take this option. How do you see it?
I mean, Matt Bradley in the comments kind of echoed what Andy just said and what I was thinking. He could be playing in his prime, well into his 30s. You know, for the reasons that a few of us on this podcast have said, him not being the most mobile might actually be his greatest asset in terms of longevity. So he could still have that ability to go to a top club in Europe and play into his 30s. I don't know if this just sounds massively unambitious, but there can only be one Ballon d'Or winner a year. And what I mean by that is there can only be so many of the absolute elite. And if he isn't getting offers left, right, and centre, and there being a race for his signature, and his only real option is to go to a Barcelona that don't necessarily want him as a first or second choice, what does he do? Sign a contract again at Wolves for the money that he's on? We probably would have offered him more, to be fair. But we've all felt a little disenfranchised with the product as of late, haven't we? And 6 years is a long, long time when if it's not something that you're necessarily getting the absolute best out of. So, for all we know, he might be looking at this as I can be the pioneer, that person that gets this Saudi league off the ground and be one of the faces of this emerging great league that's about to come around. This might be the future. Look what's going on with golf and F1 and wrestling. This is just the way it's going to go, and I want to be one of the pioneers of it. Is another way to look at it. I think I can't even see him being there for the 3 years, if I'm brutally honest with you. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of the more radical tinfoil hat wearing essences of that shortly. But yeah, professionally, I think it's probably less of a blemish and more of an asterisk on a career is the nicest way I can put it.
You do see like a lot of the common opinion you see online is like, as I think what Andy said earlier, like if someone came to you now and offered you 10 times your salary, albeit for a smaller company, let's say, you take it. But I guess with football, it's just a bit different, isn't it? Because you're already earning mega money, as we said earlier. You like as you said earlier, Matt, you're not going to be a pauper already, so you're already earning well. So what's the desire then to go and step down to such a low league? And football's a completely different industry from like the industries that any of us three work in, or the man on the street works in. It's completely far removed from that at all. And I do just wonder whether or not that when he does look back, he can go one of two ways, can't it? It can either, like you say, be one of those pioneers, what this influx of people that helped raise the Saudi League to be a genuine challenger on world football stage, or it could be this boom and bust where in 3 years they're all coming back to Europe again because something's happened or something's gone wrong. But you mentioned it there, then, Matt, that there are internet rumours abound that he could or he might go on loan to Newcastle, given the PIF links. So, do you reckon we could see him on the Tyne in the next year or two? Do you give any credibility or credence to these?
I mean, it would. I mean, this is like there'd be Super League levels of outrage, wouldn't there? We'd do a crisis Cobra meeting podcast on it, wouldn't we? Let's be honest. If it happened, they can't allow. Like the league has got to have something in place to stop that. It would be just an absolute. I mean, the FFP is a mockery in itself, isn't it? Half the time, but for the sheer audacity and brazenness of it, I don't think it would happen. Sure, I say that anything can happen in football, as we know, but I'd be really surprised if that came about. I could understand the pieces being put together and why people would think it would, but yeah, it's worrying because for all intents and purposes, it really could happen. But I think the backlash should be so severe that it would, the Premier League in itself would probably put in sanctions against clubs trying to do this and find some kind of legislation that stops it being able to happen.
I think that is possibly the only reason why it might not happen, is purely because the ramifications of that potential would be enormous. If a club in Saudi Arabia, if the Prince can buy a team of, the elite of the elite, buy them to Al Hilal, and then just loan them to Newcastle United for a percentage of that wage, that player's still getting the millions of pounds per week, but they're only getting paid like $5 or whatever for FFP purposes. Like the bottom would fall out of it. UEFA would be involved, the Premier League would be involved, FIFA would be involved, the Saudi League would be shut down. But at the same time, when the Premier League were happy to let a man come in and buy a club, a man who was happy to kill one of his own people on foreign soil, and now the Premier League are going to play dumb and sort of just hope that he abides by their rules. I don't know. It's very, very dodgy ground, I think. But I wouldn't be surprised but at the same time, it would be the end of football as we know it if it happens, I think.
Do you reckon that? Because if they want to grow the game in Saudi Arabia, they won't be able to do that by just sending the players directly back to Europe, or is it just as you say, it's the end game is not just to ultimately big up the game in Saudi Arabia, it's just to move the money around.
Yeah, I think there is some of that because the money currently is in Europe. You've got the money there, and also there's the sports washing that comes with it as well. So ultimately, by doing the sports washing, by papering over the atrocities that happen in Saudi Arabia, more eyes then turn to that product. So they're getting it in both hands, aren't they? So yeah.
I do wonder, when the players go over there to Saudi, because obviously the league, that sort of league, doesn't have the integrity that like the European leagues do. We talk about wanting to win the big trophies over here, and like Neves is one of the first players in his quote unquote prime to go over there. Matt, do you think that like they'll look back upon any trophies won in Saudi as something to really show off and shout about, instead of like players who win European leagues or European Champions Leagues or domestic cups over here? You have to say the equivalent, because it's because we can all see the big picture of it here, that it's a very small league, both coefficient based, quality based, but it's just got a ton of money washing about in it. Do you think that there'll be achievements that they'll be able to tell the grandkids about? Look, I've won 3 Saudi leagues.
I mean, don't get me wrong. If you're asking us as Wolves fans, Jason Guy could be selling this at the Mount in one of the charity things, if one of the trophies. Because we as far as it would be like a nice thing to own, because it doesn't mean anything to us. Do you know what I mean? And that's not an insult to the memorabilia fairs. They do really, really excellent work for charity. What I mean is, it doesn't mean anything to us, does it? Let's be brutally honest. A Saudi winner's medal means jack shit to us. And I think the interesting thing is, can anybody categorically say outside of maybe Neves' first game, would we ever watch that product on a regular basis? I won't be. Do you know what I mean? I don't. Players have gone on to other clubs, in other countries, in the tenure of being a fan. You don't all of a sudden then watch every single game, unless they're like in a Fabio scenario and they're on loan and we want to see how they're getting on. So I don't think that there'll ever be a time where it's really, sit down, lads. Let me tell you about the time that we had the penalty shootout in Riyadh. Do you know what I mean? It's not going to happen. But again, there's so many motivating factors that must be going through him and other players' heads, and money is just one huge factor of that. Like, a player like Koulibaly, for example, who's had a bit of a torrid time at Chelsea, I understand that move probably a little bit more so. Firmino, I think, is the latest one that's going to be going over. Players that have kind of, I think this is the difference really in the Neves one, is that it's like Firmino coming to the twilight end of his career, get that massive payday. Almost surprised that Moutinho hasn't gone, get that massive payday. And it being Neves at this point in his career, that's the shock of it all, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. Andy, do you think that they can offer the players all the money in the world, which they obviously do anyway? They offer them all the money in the world, but you can't buy that integrity, the prestige that the European competitions have.
That's exactly it. I mean, to beat Juventus, like, they're a good team, don't get me wrong, but they're not the team they were, let's say. They still have that 100+ years of history behind them. It means something to beat Juventus, even if they finish 8th in Serie A or whatever they finish this season. When you beat the biggest team in Saudi Arabia, they've been there 3 weeks. Like, it's not the same thing, is it? It doesn't have the same. Yeah, prestige. Prestige is the word. It doesn't have that prestige, does it?
No, exactly. And I mean, as like a slight deviation, just before we move on, look at the parallels between how Neves has left and how Moutinho has left the club as well. And I know I said this on one of the previous podcasts. We won't go too much into it now. It's not about Moutinho at this pod, but I'm still waiting for something to come out about that. When you look at how Neves has acquitted himself with how he's left, going out in these like blaze of glory, big send off, and then you got Moutinho, who's literally just like snuck out through the back door, like when someone backdoors on a night out, just slinking out, hoping no one notices.
The old French exit.
Yeah.
That's what they call it, is it?
Yeah. There's definitely a story to be told there, isn't there? Because for so much of his time at Wolves, he's been the elder statesman. Like, he was taken to our hearts almost immediately. And that first season is probably the best I've ever seen in a full season of a player in my 30 years following Wolves. So for it to have ended as acrimoniously as it has, and like you say, it's just sort of gone out under a cloud. There's definitely a story there, because, yeah, he seemed to have taken Wolverhampton to heart almost as much as Neves did.
So there we are then. Neves is gone. Not to where he expected, but he has gone. We wish him all the best and hope to see him back in Wolves soon in some capacity later on in his career. But just to, I guess, look at the wider picture here. What to make of the Saudi, I'm going to use quotation marks for the listeners, the Saudi threat to European football. We've seen something like this before, haven't we? First with the MLS, when they were signing players at the end of their career. That was kind of their strategy at the time, kind of pioneered by Beckham, and then ultimately players such as, I don't know, Zlatan, Lampard, Pirlo, Gerrard, Ashley Cole. They all went out there, but it wasn't a strategy that really had any legs, much like the players that went there, I suppose. And then you had China. So China's strategy was a bit different. That was that kind of government policy at the time to invest in football and get big name players over there on ridiculous contracts. Like, I think I remember, like, Graziano Pella went over there for 400 grand a week. You know, he was being paid more than Neves is now. And also trying to get the World Cup in China, but then we all know that the government kind of reversed that decision. But do we think that the Saudi, what Saudi doing now? Do we think it's a bit different? I saw an interview the other day. The UEFA president, he's commented and said he's not worried. He thinks that the Saudi thing is just like that of China, and it'll blow over. And I guess while Saudi's marquee players at the signing there, they have mainly been either 30 plus or B-lister players. And I apologise to Helder Costa when I say B-listers. There are growing players that they are coming for more established players now, such as the Neveses, and with sort of rumours of Bernardo Silva potentially going over there, Hakim Ziyech, the Chelsea goalkeeper Edouard Mendy. What do we make of it, guys? Because I mean, there's no FFP in Saudi, so they literally can spend what they want. Matt, what do you reckon? Is this how much of a threat is this to the Premier League or European football as a whole?
It does feel different this time around. Again, you know, Conte, is he gone now? N'Golo Conte? Oh, I think he's on the verge of a move if he hasn't already gone. You know, a player that is on the slow decline now, as well. It's a strange one. It's a strange one in that, you know, other sports, they're heavily investing into other sports. And whilst it's initially caused, you know, some friction and backlash, they're still doing it now. I mean, Andy will know better than me when they did their first WWE Blood Money show. It was a good, like, 6, 7, 8 years ago now. It's been a while since they've done them.
Yeah.
And they continue to do that. And, you know, that hasn't been a flash in the pan thing. I don't, when it says like a danger to European football in terms of like taking stars away, I don't know if it just becomes more players just become the different stars. Do you know what I mean? Like that machine of the Premier League or the major European confederacies. That's not the word. This isn't the South. You know, they just churn out. Their manufacturing just goes into overdrive again, and I don't think anybody would. You know, if you had the Champions League final or their equivalent in that part of the world, it's not going to matter, is it? You're always going to watch the Champions League, no matter what happens, because of that prestige. And I don't know what they would have to do to even get to a level where they competed. You're talking like decades worth of work. And by that point, we don't know where the financial, political landscape or anything would be with these kind of things. The only thing I can see being a real is if they were to get a real current player in their absolute prime, and we're talking the levels of like Mbappe, Haaland, someone like that, like a young up and comer that has the world at their feet, and then they go. And all the players that we've mentioned so far, Neves included, aren't at that marketing level. They're really good players, but none of those players that we've mentioned there are gracing the cover of a FIFA game anytime soon. Do you know what I mean? And that's the difference between cultural impact and footballing impact. All of those players have a footballing impact, but they don't have a cultural impact. They're not selling shit to impressionable youth. And I think when that starts to happen, that was when it'll open the eyes and be a bit of a worry.
I think there's like a low level issue. Like you're always going to get players across the world who will want to play for Man United, for Real Madrid. But when you're Wolverhampton Wanderers and you're competing for a really good up and coming, like a Ruben Neves, like we were 6 years ago, for example, our spending power can't match someone like Saudi Arabia. And there's the potential for where the issues are going to arrive. It's going to be the clubs who were like lower to mid-table in the Premier League, and potentially like the Championship, that could all implode almost if some of their players start looking to making waves in Saudi Arabia. So I'd imagine like the top end of the Championship is most likely better quality than what is produced in Saudi Arabia. So I do think there is a potential issue, but it's not going to be for your Champions League teams. Not for a good long time anyway, I don't think.
One of the YouTube comments there, Mac Jam made a point that I was going to bring up, because obviously for a while now the food chain has been everything to the Premier League. What happened? The Premier League essentially bankrolls European football, doesn't it? European football clubs, they'll train up their hot prospects. Premier League swoops along and just goes, "Thank you very much, we'll have them," and that will just chuck money at them. Are the Premier League, and I'm kind of focusing just on our league here for a sec, the Premier League now just being like the bully that's being threatened by an even bigger bully now, someone who's coming along who can literally come to our league and just say, right, who's your best player? Just throw money at them to go. I mean, yeah, we've talked about like the lack of prestige or integrity that the league's got, but is it a case where they're just worried that someone bigger and stronger has come along?
A little bit of that, I think. I do think they don't want to like lose face. They want to have the big stars in Europe, and I think ultimately, like I don't know if this could speak to all players, but I remember when Neymar was at Barcelona when he decided to go to PSG. Allegedly, the reason was that he could never win the Ballon d'Or playing at Barcelona. And I think there'd be a similar argument that if a player really has the gumption to want to be the best in the world, they couldn't do that anywhere other than Europe. Not even just Saudi Arabia, but no other country can offer that opportunity to be the top dog in the game. So I wonder if that might have some sway as well for the personal plaudits as well as the team and professional ones. Potentially, I don't know.
And Matt, what do you reckon to also the part of that comment there as well? Like, the Premier League, we've been doing stuff for years, like the feeder clubs and what have you, and we take over it. We've got the multi-club models where we can switch players around to suit. If what club D needs money from club C, they can manufacture a transaction. Does again not just the Premier League, I suppose, but does the European football have any moral high ground to say what Saudi are doing are wrong, or are we just all the bad guys here?
yeah, there is an element of that, and it's kind of it's better the devil you know, isn't it? In these scenarios, there's a lot of, club will buy their own training ground, or the sponsor, the owners will buy the training ground to balance the books, and there's all those kind of things. And I think we had this with the Super League, though, didn't we? So the individual leagues were under a lot of pressure because they felt their prize pigs were going to be going elsewhere, and it caused all sorts of issues. Not to labour the point home about like the country that this is all going on in, I think the Premier League themselves have allowed this system to evolve over the course of time. And I think it's just worried that they aren't going to have the control, and they aren't going to be that biggest bully on the playground or the biggest fish in the pond anymore. And you can understand why they'd feel they'd be losing their grip on it if the absolute mega superstars go there. And bringing it back to Neves, it was everywhere on news outlets. This move, it was huge. Everybody was talking about it, not just within the walls, Twitter and community. Like just BBC were reporting it as a news story, not a sports story. It kind of shockwaves went about the footballing world, and again, people who never speak to me about football were kind of going, "Oh, what's going on here, Matt? Like, talk to me about this." So you can understand why the Premier League are worried about it, and maybe thinking to themselves, "Well, we aren't in a position of privilege, and we have been for so long."
And I guess the final thing on this, just before we get to a break, I suppose, Andy, one for you is that I think, as I mentioned it before, there's no, as far as my knowledge goes, there's no FFP, or there's hardly any FFP rules in Saudi. So that generally means that they can just, it's a free market, isn't it? So, I mean, the PIF, they've took over, well, essentially nationalised for the top teams in Saudi.
Yeah.
But the ones we know, like Al Hilal, and I think whichever the one that I forget what's the one that Nuno is at now. I should know, but
Yeah,
whichever one that he's
Al
at.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much like that. And I mean, they've nationalised the four top teams of Saudi, so they can literally just do whatever they want. They can just, FFP doesn't apply. If they want to go and give someone £1 million a week, they can just go ahead and do that. So again, there's this like, right, just is it, in a way, is it changing the game a little bit, just purely on the basis of the rules don't apply to them, quite literally?
Yeah, quite potentially. Like, as far as I'm aware, FFP is very much solely a UEFA edict to try and curb the English, funnily enough. So yeah, the Saudis, they can do absolutely anything they want. And obviously the man who is in charge of it all, he's not just a billionaire, but he's a multi-billionaire. So like, he can give someone £15 million over a 3-year contract, and that person who will pick up 15, like say £45 million, that person is closer to my wage than he is to Mohammed bin Salman's wage. Like, £45 million out of £1 billion is closer to zero than it is to $1 billion. That's how big, like, we're talking here. It's insurmountable to us, but it's nothing to them.
So you're saying you can relate?
Relate. That's it. Yeah.
All right, well, look, we'll go for a quick break now, and then when we come back, we'll touch on some of the other topics that have occurred over the last few days. So just join us back momentarily. Okay, guys, welcome back. So last week we learned that those data geeks and boffins at Brentford have identified Nathan Collins as a player that they want to sign, and are currently in the process of chucking us a few bids. So you can see there from the comment on screen for the listeners, Brentford have made a third bid of 23 million plus add-ons. So £25 million up front is what we're holding out for. Brentford currently sitting at a £23 million bid. This is just 12 months after we've signed him from then relegated Burnley for 20 million. Nathan Collins is a player that I find that divides opinion. For me, when we bought him, you get the instruction manual out, you put all the individual parts on the table, and you think you've got a really great thing here. But as we've seen this season, he does have a tendency to malfunction, as has been shown, and throughout the first half of the season. And I wonder whether Lopetegui does actually rate him. So, how do we view Nathan Collins, and what do we think about the prospect of him going to Brentford, Matt? What you?
Now, this is a difficult one here as I lean closer and closer to this little lamp I have. If it's getting really dark, so basically, I think this is more of a Lopetegui problem than it is a Collins problem. And what I mean by that is, if we'd have signed Dawson at the start of the season, nobody would have expected a thing from Collins. Everybody would have understood that he is one for future seasons. He'll learn under Dawson and to some extent Kilman, and then he'll be brought into the fold as we move Dawson on. Obviously, that didn't happen, and we brought him in, and there were spells at the start of the season where he looked like an excellent player. He kung fu kicked Jack Grealish, and then it all went to shit after that. And I just think we as a fan base have wrote him off a little early. That's fine. But then I think the manager himself, with the kind of narrative at the minute, is that he's looking at players for the now, not for the future. So you have that perfect storm of those two factors, and I don't see a way out of that personally. If you're a Collins in this scenario and you're not going to be utilised because your manager doesn't have faith in you, and you get an offer from a club that is proven to be able to coach young players with a manager that is overachieving, why wouldn't you go? Why wouldn't you go? And if we can get money that's close to what we paid for him, and we know we're not going to utilise him, why wouldn't you sell? So it's almost inevitable, I think, unfortunately, because I think there's a player there, and I think with the right nurturing, there is a player there. But I don't think that Lopetegui, not that he couldn't coach him, I just don't think he wants to coach him. So what do you do? Like, you can't. It's untenable.
What's your thoughts, Andy? What do you reckon? How do you see it?
I think Matty's 100% accurate with that. It's very much come from Lopetegui, this, hasn't it? Because other than probably Little Dan, I think most of us here recognise that there is potential with him, and he just needs someone who's going to coach him to his fullest potential. And Lopetegui doesn't seem to be at all interested in that. Part of it is potentially because the few times he's brought him on, things have gone to shit a little bit. So maybe he just doesn't trust him. Maybe he doesn't see any potential there. I don't know. But I think the thing with Collins is I like the idea of Collins more than I like the actual Collins. Like, on paper, everything that we've read about him and we know about him, and even when you look at his early season stats on carrying the ball and all of that nonsense that we don't need to go into, he looks like the kind of player that would be a really good heir to Dawson. But then when we've seen him on the pitch, he doesn't pass the eye test. So I sort of get why Lopetegui maybe is a little bit fearful. I suppose the other issue is, realistically, as a fan, all we see is we'll be losing a player. There is always that potential that we're losing that player because he knows that we've got X, Y, or Z about to come in who could replace him as this big potential centre-back. I don't know.
Do you think that as it stands anyway, the small profit that we make on him justifies the sale?
I don't think it does. I mean, we're looking at, even if we get 25, which is what we're hoping for, that's £4.5 million. That's not really that much. I mean, are we really in that dire straits that we need that £4.5 million? I mean, if that's the case, then we're kind of fucked, aren't we? Let's be honest.
Well, let's say I bet Stu, when he listens to this, he will be thinking FFP or the amortization. So that 4 could be 16 over 4 years. Just to caveat that in case he makes a comment. But yeah, so we've got some comments coming in here from Matt Bradley. So apparently, if we sell Neves, Silva, and Collins, that would allow us to become big spenders and 80 million-ish. But what do you reckon, Matt? Do you reckon it's given again, like I say, it's a small beer considering 20 million. He's had, well, a very indifferent season, to put it rightly. Do you reckon it's a good price if someone's offering us nearly 25 for him after the season he's had?
Well, transfer fees are not what a player is worth. It's what the player is worth to the club that they're selling. Yeah. And in that way, then, yeah, because it's a player that we don't want, that we're selling for profit. So, yes, in those blunt terms, it is a good price for Wolves. But actually, it's making me sound like a agenda over here. But like, if Lopetegui just isn't going to coach him, or the player wants out, for all we know, we don't know any more than what we can speculate and what we read on Twitter. I think it's probably a best move for all scenario, really. My concern will be, what does that mean then in terms of what our back line looks like? Does Captain Charisma return? Or, is he being sold on to bring in another defender that's probably got a bit more experience, but isn't going to be a long-term prospect that when Lopetegui eventually goes, what are we left with? That's the more overriding concern for me.
That was going to be my next question to you, actually, was to say, would you be happy if we kept Cody but sold Collins? Is there an age versus, an experience versus raw material? Yin and yang there. Would you be happy if that happened?
I don't know. It's been fashionable to bash on Cody for a while now, and now that we're faced with a very real possibility that he'll be coming back, long term, I think it would be catastrophic. Is a bit harsh, but that's not the answer in the long term, is it? That's not. Dawson isn't the answer in the long term, and he's arguably player of the season last season. So I think that would leave us in a very sticky scenario if that was the final outcome come the end of the transfer window, and one that I think we'd learn to regret.
I agree with that. I don't think Cody's the answer. I don't think Cody is any better than Collins, even with the added experience that he's got, to be perfectly honest. We saw him flounder in a back four at Everton. I just can't see it happening. And let's be honest, he wasn't ready for a fight 12 months ago for his place. He's not getting in ahead of Dawson. He's not getting in ahead of Kilman, unless we revert to a back five, which, from as far as I'm aware, Lopetegui's never played a back five. I think he would rather have the 4 with the option of dropping Lamina in if that's how it goes. And before anyone says, can Conor Cody play midfield? No, he fucking can't. We nearly sold him as a midfielder because he was awful.
Do you reckon then, Andy, that's the case with Lopetegui, that he's got no time for coaching. He wants ready-made players rather than someone that he can spend a few years moulding. He's like, this comparison might get ripped apart, but Mourinho was that way. He just wanted players who would just be put in the team and play now. I'm not saying that they'd play the same way, whatever. That's what I always recall of Mourinho. He never had a young player that he moulded and brought through. Yeah. He's Lopetegui the same way. He just wants to get ready-made players in, chuck them in, and off you go. You're good for the next 2 years.
It sort of feels like that, doesn't it? I mean, I know we've been linked with a couple of younger players, the lad from Coventry and the one from Bristol. But even so, they feel like they're straight ahead of what you'd consider a traditional young player who's going to play 10, 15 minutes here and there and really come through. You look at someone like Joe Hodge, who apparently Lopetegui was really high on when he came in. And we haven't seen hide nor hair of him since he's come in. So does he really want to be a coach, or does he just want to manage big-name players? It kind of feels like the latter. And most of the signings that we made in January were very much ready-made. in part probably because we did need that as well. I suppose the only one who's a bit younger, obviously, was João Gomez. But again, he looks so much better than any of the other young prospects out there.
And I guess to move it on a little bit to another player whose future is still not certain, and that is of our Mexican sensation Raul. There is no, I know it's very early days in the transfer window and all that, but we haven't really had any interest in him yet reported. I did see something that the other day, an article he put out that he has ruled out a move to MLS this summer at least. But I think there were some quotes that emerged a few days ago from him about him being forced to play through his injury early this season. And I do have the quote to hand here when he started saying that when he started not playing in the team, he said he wanted to take advantage while the coach isn't using me about going for surgery. But then evidently we've then told him that we do need him. We do want you playing. So they gave him an infiltration. I'm not a medical man, so that could mean anything. An infiltration to endure the pain. And that's why he ended up playing the last few games. And it was something that helped me. But now this pain evidently has come back. He's felt it while he's been on holiday and won't be involved in the Gold Cup for Mexico. What's going on here with our medical staff? And is this another nail in their coffin, so to speak, with their complete mismanagement of Raul's injury, or is there something else behind this?
Well, this was post Dr. Death, though, wasn't it? All of this now. This is towards the back end of the season. Are we talking these quotes?
I believe so, yeah.
I don't buy this, to be honest. I mean, pain injections is nothing new in football. It's one of the FM options, isn't it? When you've got a player on the verge of an injury. So this isn't like anything that's new. And that doesn't speak to me. Contrast that with him throwing his training top or whatever it was on the last day of the season at home when he didn't play. Those aren't the actions of someone that feels like he's being forced to play through injury. You know what I mean? Just something's not right there. There's something just... It's one of these situations. I would love nothing more than Raul to get to half of the ability that he had before the injury and play for Wolves for one more season, bag 10 goals over a campaign, leave on a high. I would love it. Kevin Keegan style would love it. But it's just not going to happen, is it? It's just not going to happen. Kalajdzic will come back. Whether he stays fit for a season, probably not. But I think, the Raul scenario is just one that needs to be cut before it gets sour, and I mean really sour. There's a chance this could get ugly if going into a new season it was Kalajdzic and Raul as our two number 9 strikers. I'm sure we'll get on to Fabio shortly. It could get ugly if week after week we were relying on a player that does or doesn't want to be here, and there's this the triangle of the club, him and the fans are constantly at each other. It could get nasty. So I think for parties, it would be better if he was moved on.
Yeah, ideally, I think he needs to get a move. I'm kind of amazed that there isn't a club in Saudi Arabia or even Mexico returning back home, because he does have a famous name still, doesn't he? Still has that credibility to some extent. So I am kind of shocked at that, but I'm sort of 50-50 on the injury story, because I'm sure, like I said about Moutinho, there's definitely something going on there. And you're probably going to find the club story and Jimenez's story, and the truth is going to be somewhere in the middle with it all. Because he obviously feels that he did have an injury that needed some form of operation to correct it. And if he wasn't allowed to, and then he wasn't even on the bench some weeks, and then when he wasn't used. So they're trying to manage his pain for no reason. Like, why are you giving him injections to get through a football match if you're not putting him on the bench, or you're not even giving him 10, 15 minutes? I would imagine as a player that would be very frustrating. Like, don't put me through this crap if you're then not going to use me when I could have just had the operation. And then I'll be on my way to recuperation by now, ready for next year. But like I said, I bet the story's probably somewhere in the middle of it all.
But do you reckon he'll still be here then next summer? after this summer, shall I say?
Potentially, because I don't think he'll cancel his contract, and I'm not 100% sure who will come in for him. I mean, we might let him go on a free to just at least get the wages off the bill, but I don't know.
So, in the vein of strikers, then Matt, you mentioned him there a few minutes ago. Don Fabio, what's going to become of him? We've probably all saw on Twitter, was it a week or so ago, the agent chat. The agent was not shy in coming forward about Fabio wanting to try somewhere else. Has he burnt the bridges now with Wolves? And if he wants to go, is it understandable given how his time at Wolves has gone thus far? If you were him, what would you do?
I don't know. There's so much about this that he rubs me up the wrong way. You know, is this a call from him and his agent for I need a cuddle chat from Wolves? Is it a please get me to another club? I don't know. You know, it's not like he was going through the Morgan having paint thrown on his car kind of scenario every week, was it? Let's be brutally honest. Yeah. He wasn't given as much time and patience that he deserved in that stint, but he was also playing behind closed doors for a lot of it as well. And this whole like psychological scars issue, if that's, I don't know. Again, this feels like more like a ploy to kind of get more money out of a move than anything from an agent, than something that the player themselves, you know, how young the guy is, how influential agents are. I kind of get the feeling this isn't Don Fabio's war that he's fighting here. It's the agent on his behalf, if that makes any sense. You know, on the question of does he burn his bridges for Wolves, if he came and scored 15 goals, if he came and scored 10 goals, there'd be another petition to get a statue outside of Molineux for him, the way that we're playing. Let's be brutally honest. We're a very fickle bunch, aren't we, in this fan base? So burnt bridges, no. There's nothing like a good goal scoring record does to mend fences. But again, you talk about the fee that we've paid versus what we'd be willing to sell for. That will tell you everything. If we're willing to sell him for like 20 million or something like that, and not recoup the full money back, then it tells you everything you want to know about the need to get him shipped off before he just becomes, again, another uncomfortable scenario for the club's media team more than anything. Another handling of a player that's gone wrong.
There's a few question marks really over the statement from his agent. I believe like the first thing he said when he was talking to, was it the Wolfpack who got the scoop, I believe. The first thing he said was, I want to make sure that you're aware that he really appreciates the fans. So who is it who's like thrown him under the bus? Who did he need protection from, if not the fans? I don't quite understand why he's making that point if he's ultimately blaming the fans. But then who needs to be protecting him? If it was Bruno, well, he's fucked off. He's not here anymore. So why is that an issue? So there's a couple of question marks over the statement that make me think this is a case of him saying, I want you to want me, either to ourselves or to another club in Europe. You know, tickle me a little bit, tease me, baby, sort of thing, I think is what he wants. So that's what I think he's going for, if I'm honest. He wants that, he wants to be put on a pedestal, I think.
It's been a while since the headline of Player X issues a come and get me plea. It's been a while since saw one of those. It's a shame really for him. Just before we move on to our final thing, it's a shame really for him because I think we've done this season what we should have done with him at the start, which was to loan him out, get some games under a belt, because it's obviously not worked for him the past couple of years, especially the season before last where he didn't score the entire season, which I think really broke his confidence. But let's hope anyway that we can come to a good outcome with that one, and ideally for me, hopefully he does stay, and then we can see the real Fabio Silva. But finally section is the away kit. Let's talk kits, fellas. Let's talk about our reactions to the new kit that's come out. The club did release the away kit, and I thought it was quite a Belgian red, but the colour is actually classed as Savvy red, and So the Wolves Club Shop says that it is a pattern inspired by Mediterranean architecture. Now, obviously, we saw the 1877 Trust spokesman was not a fan. Are you two a fan of the new away kit?
I mean, the only thing savvy about it is the money saved in my wallet. Do you know, like, I personally am not, and it's a real shame because over the last few years, I've pretty much bought the away when it's come out, and then bought the home closer towards the end of the season when it's on sale or something like that. Because the away kits have been pretty unique. Even that the Cloud Simpsons intro one was like, it was pretty unique to look at, whereas this one just doesn't do anything for me really. I'm more likely to get the Mr. Blobby Pink one, the goalkeeper kit, than this, if I'm honest with you. It's not for me, Jeff, to be honest. I'll be saving my cash on this one.
I'm completely indifferent to it. I don't like it. I don't dislike it. It just exists. Like, it's fine, I guess. If I'm pushed for an answer, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, it's something the club have done over the last few years anyway. We've had the Portugal, we've had the Mexico-inspired kit, and now we've got a Spain-inspired kit. Like, yeah, I get it.
What do we think of the kits released so far in general? I mean, we've had the two goalkeeper tops. Again, I've consulted the club shop to get the official colours. Beetroot purple and acid lime. Are you a fan of those? And also, Pro kits, 115 quid. So what do you think about the goalkeeper tops and the prices?
I quite like the goalie tops. I don't know if it's just because they're loud, but I also realise that I'm a 40-year-old man and men do not buy goalie tops. Yeah, but as a grown-up, you're not allowed to buy goalie tops. So, yeah, I couldn't bring myself to it. But I do quite like them both. But the 115 quid, I mean, that's atrocious, really. I bought the first season when we had Castor. I bought the £100 one, and it's nice, and like you can see the quality in it compared to the original. But for the sake of that much money, it's not that much nicer. So I don't think they're really worth that personally.
What do you reckon, mate? Have the final word on it? Because with your lighting, you're looking like that face that pops up in the Exorcist film partway through. With all the
yeah, I need to. I'm going to disappear off into the ether if I lean too far back. I mean, 115. Did you say?
115 sheets. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a weekly food shop for some, and it's a night out for others. I suppose it depends on your personal circumstances. It's not for, like, I wouldn't pay that money for it. I don't like it. What was the colour? You had acid lime, and what was the other one? Pomegranate blue, wasn't it?
Beetroot purple.
Beetroot purple. See, Andy and Stu had told me about a vegan festival that was going on in Wolverhampton soon. It sounds like an appetizer at one of those, to be honest. Yeah, it's not for me.
A bit of acid lime sprinkled on top.
A bit of acid lime sprinkled beetroot canopy. Yeah, it's not for me really. But I think one of the leaks for the home shirt looks fairly interesting, and there's always the third shirt that we might never wear. So there's still hope yet.
All right. Well, we await the home shirt and the, I guess, probably outlandish out there third shirt with severe anticipation. And with that, we will call the pod there. So thank you to all you listeners and YouTube viewers for taking in the show. Keep up to date with everything on the Fancast at Wolves Fancast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And until we meet again, it's goodbye from Andy.
See you later, everyone.
And it's goodbye from Matt.
Take it easy, everybody. Look after yourselves.
And it's a goodbye from me. See you all later, guys.
Who would be a Wolves fan, eh?
On goes ball. People might yet win it here.